Who is this actually good for, who should skip it, and is it worth the price for normal everyday buyers? If you've ever stood in a crowded lab trying to squeeze a handful of culture plates onto a benchtop incubator that was already humming with a dozen other experiments, you know the frustration of limited space and compromised workflow. That moment of hesitation wondering whether a mini incubator with a built-in roller will actually simplify your day, or just add another gadget to the pile is what I'm trying to clear up today. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First, let's set the scene. A typical teaching lab or a startup biotech group often works with only a few dozen samples at a time. They need a reliable, temperature-controlled environment, but they can't justify spending the budget on a full-size incubator that takes up half a wall. The Labnet I5110A mlR is marketed as a general-purpose mini incubator with lab roller and 3 rotisseries, which basically means you get a compact chamber that can hold a few petri dishes or flasks while the integrated roller gently mixes them, and 3 small rotisserie trays that can spin vials or microtiter plates. The idea is to keep everything in one footprint, reducing the back and forth between a separate incubator and a shaker. So, who should consider buying this unit? If you're a graduate student running a handful of bacterial cultures for a semester project, the I5110A mlR can be a real time saver. You set the temperature, drop in the plates, and let the roller do the work while the rotisseries keep your liquid cultures moving. It's especially handy for protocols where you need a gentle, continuous motion, think yeast fermentations or enzyme assays that benefit from constant agitation without the shear forces of a vortex. For small biotech firms that are still in the prototyping phase, the compact size means you can fit it on a crowded bench and still have room for pipettes, a microscope, and a laptop. The built-in roller also means you don't have to purchase a separate orbital shaker, which can shave a few $100s off your initial equipment budget. On the flip side, you'll want to skip this if your lab routinely processes dozens of plates at once or needs precise CO control for mammalian cell culture. The mini incubator's interior volume is limited, and while the roller is convenient, it isn't designed for high-throughput workflows where you might need to rotate dozens of plates simultaneously. Also, the I5110A mlR doesn't come with built-in CO regulation, so if you're growing delicate cell lines that demand a 5% CO atmosphere, you'll end up adding a separate gas controller, which defeats part of the all-in-one appeal. Now, let's talk about the practical strengths that actually show up in daily use. The first thing I noticed during a week-long trial in a university microbiology lab was the temperature stability. Even when the room temperature swung by a few degrees during the day, the incubator held the set point within a narrow band, thanks to its insulated walls and a fairly responsive thermostat. For most bacterial and yeast cultures, that level of control is more than sufficient. You won't see the drift that sometimes plagues cheaper countertop models. The roller mechanism is surprisingly gentle. I placed a set of 25 milliliters flasks containing a broth culture on the tray, set the roller to a low speed, and after 24 hours the culture showed uniform growth without any foaming or spillage, something that can happen on a vigorous shaker. The 3 rotisseries are also a neat addition. I used them for a small batch of enzyme reactions in microcentrifuge tubes, and the slow rotation kept the reagents well mixed without the need to pause the experiment for manual mixing. There are a couple of weaknesses that become apparent once the novelty wears off. First, the interior space, while adequate for a few plates, feels cramped if you try to stack anything beyond 2 layers. You'll need to plan your experiment layout carefully. Otherwise, you end up shuffling dishes around, which can introduce contamination risk. Second, the control panel is very minimalist, just a few knobs and a digital readout. That simplicity is nice, but it also means you don't get advanced programming features like multi-step temperature ramps or automatic shutdown timers. If your protocol requires a stepwise temperature change, for example, a heat shock step followed by an incubation, you'd have to manually adjust the dial, which can be a bit tedious. Finally, the unit runs on a standard AC plug and draws a moderate amount of power. In a shared lab space where outlets are limited, you might need to prioritize which equipment gets plugged in. Another practical consideration is maintenance. The interior is lined with a smooth, non-porous material that wipes clean with a mild disinfectant. However, because the roller and rotisseries are moving parts, you'll want to inspect the bearings every few months for dust buildup. The manufacturer recommends a quick spin down with a dry cloth after each use, which isn't a big ask, but it's a step you can't ignore if you're aiming for sterility. In my experience, the unit,